There's breaking news on the fate of that $143 million affordable housing project on Houston's East End. It's a pretty stunning example of political corruption and outright fraud.
This is grand theft on a massive scale.
The FBI, EPA, and the HUD Inspector General raided the place last October to conduct environmental testing after repeated discoveries of toxic ash. 7 months after it was supposed to start leasing to some of Houston's needy families, it remains vacant. Developers, they've now missed a multi-million-dollar deadline to open the place. You guys blew the whistle on this thing 5 years ago.
It should have been stopped on day one. If it's wrong, it's wrong. If it doesn't qualify to be a housing project, it doesn't qualify, period. Every taxpayer got screwed.
The board of the Houston Housing Authority has been presented a proposal from Mr. David Northern that he resign his employment as president and CEO of the Houston Housing Authority, effective immediately.
But there was a catch to this November deal. Taxpayers would have to pay the HHA president 6 months' salary just to go away.
All in favor? Any opposed?
David Northern's resignation came just a few weeks after the Justice Department had been at 800 Middle Street. Houston Mayor John Whitmire stopped the leasing of the property last July.
No one should have ever approved the Middle Street project. It's under investigation now, and I'll leave it at that.
David Northern wasn't president of HHA when the suspect land deal first happened, but he had defended the 800 Middle Street project despite the glaring red flags.
If you see that site, it's a beautiful and amazing site.
Maybe if you like scenes of little kids playing in a field of toxic ash from an old city garbage incinerator. Instead of protecting taxpayers, Northern had called those complaining about 800 Middle sinister forces. One of those sinister forces, this guy, East End developer Tony Padua, one of the first to blow the whistle. No one's been held accountable. Not a single person or company has been held accountable.
It was a massive fraud.
I said earlier it was corrupt. I believe it is.
Texas state senators were up in arms during a legislative hearing at the Capitol. The new Housing Authority chairman was called to testify.
I was asked to testify today on a particular project that precedes my time on the board.
That was false. Here is Proler when they voted on the acquisition of the land back in July 2019. We ended up paying $54 million to buy this dirt from the Cockrell family. Emails show former Mayor Sylvester Turner's economic director, Andy Icken, was personally involved in the negotiations.
Before they purchased the property, there was never an appraisal done.
I don't know what.
Don't grab my microphone like that. What's wrong with you? It's called assault. The land deal for 800 Middle had been brokered by Lance Gilliam, who was the former chairman of the Houston Housing Authority.
He should never have anything else to do with HUD and government work at all.
Gilliam's partner, Leisha Green Ellis, the wife of County Commissioner Rodney Ellis. Their company was paid $650,000 in brokerage fees. A land deal made while toxic ash on the site was literally leaking into Buffalo Bayou in clear view. It was a harbinger of the environmental nightmare to follow, what's led to the fountain of fraud we've been exposing at HHA despite a concerted effort to hide public records.
I think this has to be done by someone with a badge, honestly.
It's just in the last couple of weeks that we received 26,000 pages of records that had been previously kept secret from us. And while we applaud all these disclosures, it's time for someone to be actually held accountable for this mess. Don't you think people have a right to know who's making money on this deal? We've already proven that Houston Housing Authority officials, with the help of NRP, signed false sworn documents claiming there were no environmental issues here. One of the hurdles to secure tens of millions of dollars in state-approved bonds and tax credits. But they all knew it wasn't true.
They were doing projects with people in environmental dangerous locations because people knew people.
There was a Superfund site next door a huge radio tower in the fall zone of the property. On the other side is the old Velasco garbage incinerator, where city trash was burned for years. HUD knew there was contamination surrounding the place as well. Houston HUD boss Lorraine Walls sent this email back in December of 2019 about that contamination, quoting, "Other lots available without contamination history. Children don't always read signs." But that didn't stop the Turner administration, or the federal government for that matter, from agreeing to put these families at risk.
Life is not always fair.
The Texas Attorney General knows about all this, but has yet to file a lawsuit, despite evidence of fraud. He should, because the new documents, they show us that this project should have been stopped before it ever started.
It's one thing to be right next to all the contamination, and it's one thing to be
On top of it,
on top of it, yeah.
even NRP's own lawyer warned in an email against moving forward without further environmental investigation. He was ignored. In August of 2022, despite evidence to the contrary, David Northern assured financing companies there were no pending lawsuits standing in the way of the project. But that wasn't true. Neighbors had sued, snapping pictures of the toxic cloud being created from the ash. But those lawsuits were dismissed because the Housing Authority went to federal court and claimed government immunity. Turned out, the toxic dirt exposed was 6 times higher than the legal limit for lead. And why are we surprised? It was a stone's throw from that incinerator and from the lead products company. What HHA kept hidden from the public, even a federal judge, they had given away 40% of the equity in this apartment complex to Cleveland-based NRP, part of their serial violations of the Texas Open Meetings Act, hiding details of contracts, financial agreements. The chairman of Turner's Housing Authority back then was Lawrence Snowden. Don't you think people have a right to know who's making money on this deal? He should face a grand jury. So should Congressman Turner. NRP sold the tax credits it received to Hudson Housing Capital. They provide money for affordable housing projects across the country. Their second installment payment to NRP of $6 million was due to be paid on January 1st of this year. But there was a catch to that agreement. 800 Middle Street had to have its occupancy permit as of January 1st of this year. That didn't happen. That means NRP is in technical default, and that could mean the remaining $32 million may not have to be paid at all. Hudson Housing Capital has not responded to our request for comment. Neither has Berkadia or Deutsche Bank, 2 other huge institutions involved in the financing of this construction. And with the federal investigation now right out in the open, who knows if anyone will ever be allowed to live in the pointed Bayou Bend. We had first reported the FBI was already investigating, can you believe it? Back in April of 2020, former HHA board member Phyllis Wilson, she had voted against buying the land in the first place.
The FBI is knocking on my door. They're knocking on the wrong doors.
In December of 2022, the construction of a storm sewer line during construction exposed toxic ash for a second time. It took a lawsuit from residents to force NRP and the Housing Authority to actually properly dispose of tons of contaminated soil. NRP had been trying to cover up the exposed ash with other dirt. In September of 23, more ash was found. In places, taxpayers were repeatedly told were free of contamination. Yet HHA had now hired the very same environmental consultant, Mike Marcone, who had misled TCEQ in the first place. He should have lost his license already, so he can't lie to taxpayers anymore. At the very least, he shouldn't get another single penny of our money. In October of 23, the TCEQ issued citations to the Housing Authority for failing to properly report and dispose of an imminent threat. HHA had relied on the Turner administration all this time to take responsibility for 800 Middle Street. The TCEQ citations set off alarm bells. City housing official Laura Serrano sent a message to HHA's real estate director, Jay Mason. Construction operations, she reported, should cease. But they didn't. And here is the likely reason why. NRP hired this guy, Neil Ratcliffe, to lobby HUD to let construction continue. Ratcliffe was an assistant secretary of HUD during the first Trump administration. He resigned from HUD just 2 weeks after NRP had signed the purchase contract for 800 Middle. Some of his invoices have now been produced, as HHA slowly releases documents which should have been produced years ago, long before the cost of this housing scandal had fully unfolded. In February of 24, Laura Serrano sends another warning letter to Jay Mason, quoting, "The environmental reevaluation process is expected to be lengthy and complex for this project, yet the construction continues, despite the repeated discoveries of toxic ash. Who's to blame for that? Just 4 months later, another acre of toxic ash up to 22.5 feet deep is uncovered."
They knocked the trees down, and underneath the trees is all this exposed ash.
And we're talking about ash with lead, with dioxin, with a whole range of ugly, poisonous chemicals, right?
Yes, barium, arsenic, dioxins.
David Northern may be gone, and good riddance, but Jay Mason, your HHA real estate director, you're still paying him. And Janine Hubbell-Cox, the attorney who helped conceal records from you, well, she's now the interim president at HHA.
Every single person needs a champion as we move forward.
And the Houston mayor who presided over this scandal, he hasn't gotten punished either. He got elected to Congress in November. But if former Texas State Representative Scott Turner becomes the new Secretary of HUD under President Trump, as expected, he'll be blessed with a huge housing scandal that will greet him as he enters the front door. You've been involved in real estate for a long time. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Never.
Even though I am a very compassionate guy, people who prey on the poor, they deserve no compassion. Somebody better go to jail for this.